Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Pam Bondi are not two figures most people expect to see collide in a dramatic exchange. Yet that is exactly what happened during this hearing, and the moment caught nearly everyone off guard. What made it even more striking was how it began not with a heated accusation or a partisan attack, but with a basic procedural question, the kind of question that should have been easy to answer. Instead, it exposed a much deeper issue. Within moments, Whitehouse revealed that Bondi, a nominee for Attorney General, was sidestepping fundamental oversight questions that go to the heart of whether the Department of Justice is operating transparently or concealing key details from Congress. Whitehouse opened by pointing out that several questions raised earlier in the hearing had been met with no real answers from Bondi. He focused on two specific areas and explained why both fall squarely within standard Department of Justice procedures and Congressional oversight authority. The first issue involved how FBI agents are provided with cash for investigative purposes. As Whitehouse explained, distributing large sums of cash to agents is not casual or informal. It is governed by strict internal controls. A specialized unit within the FBI, known as the Commercial Payments and Confidential Services Unit, oversees the entire process. When agents in the field determine that cash is needed for an investigation, they do not simply withdraw it themselves. They submit a request to this unit. The funds are then transferred to the appropriate field office, and only then do agents use the money as part of their work. Every step of this process is documented, reported, and subject to routine audits. Whitehouse emphasized that this is not a sensitive operational secret. It is an administrative function centered on tracking money, not investigative strategy. He also noted that in this particular case, the investigation in question had already been closed. There was no ongoing operation at risk. That fact alone removes any argument that answering questions about the funds could compromise law enforcement activity. More importantly, FBI procedures explicitly state that all such expenditures must be accurately recorded in anticipation of a possible congressional audit. If the FBI itself acknowledges that Congress has the authority to review these transactions, then there is no legitimate basis to claim that Congress cannot ask where the money went. Whitehouse made the issue concrete. If $50,000 leaves a U.S. government account and is never returned, that is not a trivial detail. That is a legitimate oversight concern. Following the money is a core responsibility of Congress, and refusing to explain why taxpayer funds did not come back raises serious red flags. This, he argued, was the backdrop to the question Bondi refused to answer. Refusal he described as improper. Whitehouse then turned to the second issue, the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility, commonly known as OPR. He carefully explained how OPR functions so there could be no confusion. When someone files a complaint against a DOJ attorney, that complaint is sent to OPR. The office first conducts an initial review to filter out baseless or frivolous allegations. If the complaint has merit, OPR formally opens an inquiry. Once an inquiry is initiated, OPR conducts an investigation and prepares a report outlining its findings. Standard practice is for a summary of that report to be released publicly. This process is routine, structured, and well established within the Department of Justice. Whitehouse's point was clear. Both issues he raised followed long-standing DOJ procedures, and neither justified evasion or silence. The refusal to answer was not about protecting investigations. It was about avoiding accountability. Whitehouse made it clear that when he asked for the OPR summary, he wasn't demanding anything secret or extraordinary. He wasn't asking for classified material or privileged information. He was asking for something that, by design, eventually becomes public. That is how the Office of Professional Responsibility is structured to work. These summaries exist for a reason. They are meant to be shared so that U.S. attorneys and assistant U.S. attorneys across the country understand the rules, the standards, and the precedents governing their professional conduct. Publishing those outcomes isn't controversial. It's instructional. In fact, Whitehouse went further. He pointed out that OPR's own public website explicitly states that full, Investigative reports, not just summaries, can be provided to Congress when formally requested. That matters. It means this isn't a gray area. The Department of Justice itself acknowledges that Congress has the authority to see these materials. So from White House's perspective, the questions he was asking were not aggressive or improper. They were routine oversight. He laid out what any member of the committee should reasonably be able to ask when a complaint is filed. Against a DOJ official? Did the complaint stop at the initial screening stage? Did it advance to a formal inquiry? Was an investigation conducted? Was a final report completed? And if so, where is the public summary? And beyond that, Congress is well within its rights to request the full investigative report. None of this is radical. It's standard procedure. That's why White House said he hoped the committee would support his effort to get straightforward answers to questions the Department of Justice already agrees Congress is entitled to ask. He wasn't asking for favors. He was asking for compliance with established rules. He thanked the committee for allowing him to clarify his position and made one thing unmistakably clear. He was not going to drop these questions simply because the answers were uncomfortable. Then White House shifted tone, but not purpose. He offered an analogy that landed hard. He explained that his spouse is a marine scientist, and one of Rhode Island's major offshore species is squid. When squid feel threatened, they release a cloud of ink and dart away, hoping the distraction will draw attention away from them. White House said what he saw in the hearing felt very similar. Instead of direct answers, he received clouds of distraction. Verbal ink meant to obscure the issue rather than resolve it, and that, he said, was unacceptable. Congress is entitled to real answers, not diversions, especially when DOJ procedures themselves clearly state that Congress has oversight authority in these exact situations. He thanked the committee again and yielded his time, but what followed only made the moment more intense. The more White House pressed, the more Bondi retreated into vague responses and evasions. Each non-answer didn't resolve concerns. It multiplied them. And that's what locked viewers in. Because this wasn't a case of political theater. Most senators posture during hearings. White House doesn't. His approach is deliberate. He asks narrow questions. He sticks to facts. He avoids grandstanding. That's exactly why this exchange stood out. He wasn't attacking Bondi with ideology. He wasn't performing for cameras. He was drilling into procedure, the basic systems that keep the Justice Department accountable. Cash controls, ethics reviews, oversight mechanisms, and when a nominee for Attorney General can't explain those fundamentals, even in general terms, even in principle, it signals a serious problem. The tension began with something almost painfully ordinary: cash. How the FBI tracks physical money used in field operations. It sounded dull. It sounded harmless. But White House knew that starting with the simplest question would make evasion impossible to hide. That's why he asked it. And that's why the answers, or lack of them, mattered so much. When $50,000 in FBI operational cash leaves a government account and never comes back, one simple question matters more than anything else. Where did the money go? That should have been an easy answer. It should have taken only a few seconds. This isn't some mysterious or informal process. There's nothing secretive or improvised about how the FBI handles cash used in investigations. There is a dedicated unit inside the Bureau called the Commercial Payments and Confidential Services Unit. Its entire job is to track, approve, distribute, and document investigative funds. No agent just grabs cash. No one operates off the books. When money is needed, a request is submitted. That request is reviewed. Approval is documented. The funds are transferred. And every step is logged in a system designed specifically for accountability. Congress can audit it. Inspectors can review it. Nothing disappears into a void. This isn't speculation. The FBI's own internal guidelines explicitly state that all cash payments must be accurately recorded in anticipation of a congressional audit. That language exists for a reason. It acknowledges oversight as part of the process, not an intrusion. That's why Senator Whitehouse wasn't asking a gotcha question. He was asking the kind of question Congress is expected to ask. If money leaves a federal account and does not return, there must be documentation explaining why. Was it spent? Was it recovered? Was it forfeited? Was it mishandled? Those answers protect the integrity of the system. But instead of confirming that the rules were followed or even acknowledging that such documentation is required, Bondi avoided the question entirely. She didn't explain the process. She didn't confirm compliance. She didn't clarify what happened to the funds. She simply sidestepped it. And Whitehouse immediately understood the significance of that silence. This wasn't just about a missing answer. It was about whether standard Department of Justice procedures had been followed at all. That moment changed the tone of the hearing. Because if a nominee for Attorney General can't explain a basic, routine accountability mechanism, it raises a much bigger concern. If she can't speak clearly about how money is tracked, how can the public trust her to oversee an entire department responsible for enforcing the law? And that wasn't the end of it. Whitehouse then moved to an even more sensitive area: internal accountability inside the Department of Justice itself. The Office of Professional Responsibility, known as OPR, this office exists for one purpose: to hold DOJ attorneys and officials accountable when they cross ethical or legal lines, when power is abused, when evidence is mishandled, when procedures are violated. OPR is supposed to be the internal safeguard. Despite how Bondi framed it, OPR is not a sealed vault or a shadow operation. Its process is structured, documented, and well established. Anyone can file a complaint. Private citizens, judges, defense attorneys, whistleblowers, even DOJ employees themselves. Every complaint goes through an initial review. That step filters out frivolous claims, bad faith accusations, and political noise, but if the complaint has merit, if there is credible information suggesting misconduct, OPR moves forward. An inquiry begins. That inquiry can escalate into a full investigation. And when that happens, OPR produces a written report. Not gossip, not internal whispers. A formal document laying out what happened, who was involved, what evidence was examined, and whether discipline or corrective action is warranted. And this is where the issue becomes unavoidable. Because when OPR reaches that stage, the process creates records. Real records. Reports that exist for oversight. Reports that Congress has the right to request. Reports that are not hypothetical. They are part of how the Department of Justice maintains credibility. And that's the part that mattered most. Summaries of Office of Professional Responsibility reports are not optional. They are not favors granted at the discretion of DOJ leadership. They are released publicly as a matter of policy. This is part of the Department of Justice's own stated commitment to transparency. These summaries serve a critical function. They establish precedent, clarify ethical expectations for prosecutors across the country, and reassure the public that misconduct inside the department is addressed rather than buried, and it goes further than that. OPR explicitly states on its own website that investigative reports, not just the public summaries, can be provided to Congress when properly requested. That authority is built into the process. Congress has the right to review them. This isn't a gray area. It's written into DOJ procedures. So when Senator Whitehouse asked Pam Bondi whether the OPR complaint in question passed initial review, whether it advanced to a formal inquiry, whether a report was produced, and whether DOJ would provide the summary required under its own rules, he wasn't pushing boundaries. He wasn't demanding privileged material. He was following the oversight process exactly as it was designed to work. And once again, Bondi didn't answer. She didn't confirm whether the complaint cleared the initial screening. She didn't say whether an inquiry had been opened. She didn't acknowledge whether a report existed. She didn't commit to releasing the summary that DOJ policy already says should be public. Instead, she deflected. She spoke around the question. She avoided specifics. She offered no concrete response at all. That evasiveness stood out precisely because the rules are already public. OPR's guidelines clearly state that summaries are intended for release and that Congress may request investigative materials. There was no legal barrier to answering the question. There was no national security concern. There was no ongoing investigation that required silence, and that's when Whitehouse delivered the line that immediately spread beyond the hearing room. The squid ink metaphor. It wasn't a throwaway joke. It was a precise description of a well-known defensive tactic. When a squid feels threatened, it releases a cloud of ink to obscure itself, hoping confusion will provide an escape. Whitehouse made clear that, in his view, this was exactly what was happening. Instead of answers, there was noise. Instead of clarity, distraction. Verbal ink released to avoid direct accountability, but beneath the metaphor was a serious warning. Evasiveness at this level is not harmless. When someone nominated to lead the Department of Justice cannot or will not answer basic questions about financial tracking and ethics oversight, it signals a deeper problem. Transparency inside DOJ is not optional. It is the foundation of the institution's legitimacy. That's why this moment resonated far beyond the hearing itself. Bondi wasn't being asked to disclose classified intelligence. She wasn't being pressured to compromise an active investigation. She wasn't invoking privilege or statutory restrictions. She was being asked about routine, documented, administrative procedures, the very procedures DOJ leaders are expected to understand and defend. In the aftermath, legal observers and oversight experts took notice. Some carefully speculated that her evasiveness might indicate an effort to shield individuals involved in questionable transactions. Others suggested she may not fully understand the internal processes she would be responsible for overseeing. Still others raised the possibility that she was deliberately avoiding answers to prevent creating contradictions with prior DOJ actions already on record, regardless of the explanation. The result was the same. A nominee for Attorney General declined to provide straightforward answers about transparency mechanisms that are central to the rule of law. And in a department whose credibility depends entirely on accountability, that silence spoke louder than any response ever could. None of this has been proven, and that distinction matters. But the sheer number of theories that surfaced afterward shows just how damaging evasiveness can be. When leaders refuse to answer straightforward questions, people don't stop thinking. They start guessing. Silence creates space and speculation rushes in to fill it. That isn't a failure of the public. It's a consequence of leadership choosing opacity over clarity. And the issue here extends far beyond a single nominee. What this moment truly exposed was something much larger and more troubling. A growing pattern where oversight is treated as optional, where congressional questioning is framed as a political ambush rather than a constitutional duty, where transparency quietly gives way to obstruction, with the assumption that most people won't notice or won't care. But this hearing was different. Senator Whitehouse wasn't waging a partisan attack. He wasn't challenging Bondi's ideology or political alignment. He was asking her to respect and uphold the basic rules of the very department. She was seeking to lead procedures, documentation, accountability, the fundamentals. And that's exactly why the clip spread so rapidly online. People recognized something painfully familiar. The frustration of watching an official dodge instead of answer. The irritation of seeing accountability replaced by wordplay and deflection. The exhaustion that comes from watching public institutions weaken not through explosive scandals, but through quiet stonewalling and procedural fog. Viewers across the spectrum praised Whitehouse, not because he was loud, but because he was precise. He cut through the noise. He named the evasions as they were happening. He pointed directly to DOJ policies that already require transparency and made clear that these weren't optional guidelines, but binding standards. As time goes on, moments like this become markers. Not because of drama or viral sound bites, but because they reveal whether institutions are still functioning as intended, whether oversight still has real power, whether nominees still feel obligated to answer basic questions about public funds and professional conduct, and whether those seeking authority understand that the rules apply to them just as much as to anyone else. That's why viewers were left with one unavoidable question. If this is how Pam Bondi responds during a confirmation hearing, under oath, under direct scrutiny, with cameras rolling, how would she respond once in office, when the spotlight fades and the pressure eases? That concern is what elevated this exchange beyond ordinary political theater. It turned it into a warning. Because when transparency becomes negotiable, accountability becomes impossible. And when accountability collapses, institutions don't fail all at once. They erode quietly, from the inside out. White House's message wasn't directed at Bondi alone. It was aimed at the entire system. A reminder that Congress not only has the right to ask hard questions, but the obligation to do so. And that nominees have a duty to answer plainly, without distraction, without deflection, and without disappearing behind procedural smoke. If you care about oversight, transparency, and keeping the Justice Department truly accountable, stay with us. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the only way to keep sunlight on powerful institutions is to stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop asking the questions that matter.